Okay, got the recording started. So I've got a couple things that I added to the agenda. Let me just read those off real quick. So for this week, I wanted to open up a discussion on monitoring and logging. Is there anything left on version 1.11 that we need to be taken care of? And then closing on what DNS changes we were going to make. And then I got a few test updates in the link as well. Did you have anything you want to add to that list, Michael?
No, that's about it. I said earlier, so that sounds good to me.
Okay. Let's start with the 111 because I think that's going to be relatively quick. So we're in code freeze. I'm not aware of any PRs that we're still waiting on for merge. Does anybody else have any? Or any other open issues for 111? All right, I'll take that as a no. So I guess let's move on to the follow-up from last week on the DNS. So Dinesh and Madan continued looking into that. We had two options for how to fix that proposed last week. So do you want to go over where you landed on that, Dinesh?
I'm still working on. Alan, did you follow up with the SIG network on when Linux is moving to a CNI spec 0.4? Do you know?
Unfortunately, I just emailed them today because I was rather busy last week. So basically what I did is email the CNI contributor and ask him about what issues we are facing.
Yeah, so I went through a lot of articles and
the only thing, do you mind if I go on, Dinesh?
Sorry, can you repeat that last statement?
Do you mind if I continue with a few things?
Sure, go ahead.
So besides asking when V04 will be out, basically, so we can get that get-for, ask him about is it going to be a default on Linux as well? Basically, what DNS servers and search domains you have to specify to a given pod. And afterwards, I looked over the documentation, and I'm posting the links here. So it gets a bit worse in the state that what we need to support. From what I saw in the documentation, basically you can override everything. So you can override per pod any DNS and search domain. And I don't know if somebody actually tested that on the Windows side. You can also specify from the Kubernetes command line argument and from the CNI config. From the CNI config, basically it works because that's the way we're using it now. The only problem is we need probably to support the previous cases as well. So basically what you will have on the host to be cloned directly into the pods and actually state from a pod configuration the DNS servers and the search domains to see if they actually apply. It's either we don't do that and just stick to the CNI configuration, or we at least document it, or somebody when it tries to add some pod specific annotations, for example, for the DNS, so you get at least a logging error out of it. Does that make sense for everyone else?
So what's your recommendation in this case? Are you recommending that we do the CNI route?
I think at the end of the day, we should support them all. But for the time being, because we only have the CNI route, we should probably at least document it. So that would be what I have in mind. I mean, I would love to have them all, because if you think about the business case, if you want to have a pod with a specific DNS, because in inside of the same pod, you have, for example, a DNS server, maybe one the local one, another one from the host.
But even if we go through the CNI route, and if the DNS information is passed through an add endpoint call, I mean, we'll be able to support that model, right?
Not really, because you need to specify per pod basis. So, for example, if you have a pod with some descriptions, let me actually fetch you.
So if you put in the CNI config file, it's going to apply to all pods, but I think Dinesh is saying put it in the add endpoint API call, which is different.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm not talking about CNI config. I'm talking about through the add endpoint call that comes for every endpoint. If we specify as part of the JSON spec, then basically we can program it just for that part. And CNI spec calls it out that you can do that, and then basically we can return it. The problem is DNS is much more related to networking in Windows, and it's part of the endpoint configuration, so we want to keep it that way. And if individual pod is the only gap, I would like to address that by implementing it, and we can pass it through the add endpoint call.
Well, I think per pod specification, it should work on right now, judging from the documentation. So basically, if you specify the configuration, you should get it.
Yes.
Yeah, Dinesh, does that include both the DNS server list as well as the search suffix list?
Yes.
Okay.
Both. Yes.
And for the host and configuration, should we document it? It's basically either having
at the end of the day, we don't know if it is host or if it is individual different from pod spec. I need to go over the links that you sent it, but if there is an option that to specify to basically take the DNS information from the node and pass it to the pod's DNS config, I would like that model rather than giving a flag that says, okay, it inherits from this DNS node. Let me go over it. Whatever that option is there, we will try to implement that in Windows.
Okay. So if we want to use the CNI add endpoint call, do we need changes to the CNI plugins like WinCNI and Azure CNI and OVN Kubernetes? Or do we need changes to the kubelet or both?
So we need changes to kubelet, WinCNI, and HCSHIM.
Is it okay for us to address these changes after 1.11?
That is a call. Patrick, I don't know.
I mean, I think it's too late to get into 1.11 regardless, but let me...
Yeah, that's basically what I'm thinking, that, you know, we haven't done any testing on this. We haven't even implemented it. So it looks like it's going to be a post 1.11 thing, but I do agree we should make these changes.
I mean, 1.11 code freeze ends today, and then they open the final release branch tomorrow. So if we don't have code in hand, we're not going to get it for 11.
Yes.
So I think for 11, what we need to do is make sure that we update the website documentation to clarify that as a temporary measure, you need to make sure that the DNS servers are specified in the CNI config file that's written to disk. And then we'll have the caveat that, you know, the DNS search suffix is going to be wrong because it's not going to be set on a per namespace basis.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes.
So we try to add a list of patch to maybe spit out in the log when the user tries to do this. It's like a semi-hotfix, at least the user is informed from the logs. if he actually tries to.
Hey, Aline, I didn't get that 100%. Can you please repeat that, please?
I was thinking about just adding a log error. So, for example, when you don't specify, you at least get the error, okay, no DNS found in the CNI config, so we won't set anything inside the pod. That way, at least the user can know when he's actually trying to do different stuff. And
I mean, I think rather than doing that, if we get a fix in the master in the next, week or two, I think we may also have a chance to get it cherry picked back to an 11 dot release.
Yep, I agree with that. That's probably what's going to happen if we finish it fast enough. And like usually most people wait to the, it's going to be 111.1 or .2. That's what people will install. So if we get cherry picked into that, then we have a good chance of actually going down the path with the right solution.
here is my question: doesn't this get flagged as a feature and it only gets into the next release of Kubernetes? Or can it actually be considered as a hotfix or a fix?
We can work with them on the semantics of this. I doubt this will be considered a full feature.
I mean, we're not changing any APIs. We're correcting how they work.
I couldn't agree more, but still, if you didn't have the feature before and you have it now, it can be flagged as a feature. It depends on.
Aline, we can work with them on that. And if they don't cherry pick it, what we can do is we can actually go down the alternative where you said if the DNS config is not specified, then we error out and we flag that error. So that would not be an expensive fix for us to take if it doesn't get cherry picked.
I'll be able to give you an update on the changes by next meeting. I mean, in my opinion, it's going to be small, but let's have the changes ready and then we can make the decision.
Do you need any help, Dinesh, on that side?
Yes, probably review and pushing the PR upstream.
Do you want me to? I don't know. You could probably do the HNS stream, and I can do the Kubernetes side if you want.
Oh, that'll be awesome. Let me start an email thread with you and Madan, Alan.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we know what we need to do there. So moving on to the next item I had on the list. So I'm just reordering these in the doc so it follows the actual order we used in the meeting. So one of the other big gaps that we have to get to graduate from beta is making sure that we're prepared to with everything we need in terms of monitoring and logging. So for 1.11, PengFei got a PR in that covers just some of the core metrics, except for networking. The networking PR is open for 1.12. And then the other thing I did was I went and looked at the test cluster that I have set up on ACS Engine and looked at all the different log sources that that I could find. And so I've got a doc linked in the notes here. But basically what I found was that we had logs from the kubelet and kubeproxy on disk, but either the file names were mislabeled or we had set the wrong log levels on there because there were a bunch of files that were .error.log, but it appeared to have log notes for both for successful cases as well as failures.
It's okay.
And I think part of that's because we're using NSSM right now instead of the native service entries. But I guess sort of the bigger question I have is whether or not the log sources that people expect are enabled on Windows, or if there are things that are still missing that we need to go address. So I'd like to ask everyone to take a quick look at that list I had, and if there's anything you're looking for, or if you're trying to get it to work in a particular monitoring solution, I'd love some more help there, because this isn't something I've ever dug into on the Linux side.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that I've had people ask me about Prometheus monitoring against Windows nodes. And I personally never had the time to sit down and investigate what it would take and how much of that data that you produce could be ingested by Prometheus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have the time now, but this would be a useful exercise. I'll definitely put it on my to-do list and see if I can look into that. But along the lines of what you're talking, that will validate some of the findings you had.
Patrick, is something that I actually tried today, and I don't know if this is the intended behavior on Linux as well, but it's basically whenever you specify, and I actually ran the kubelet from the command line, not from services,
Mm-hmm.
not from web services, so on. The big issue I have with it is basically you get several files, like in event viewer. So basically you have different log levels, warning, informational errors, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's really helpful to have multiple files split on the logging intention. Instead of having just a big file with some key values that, for example, it's either a warning in front, so the tag should be in front. But I can look into how they do it on Linux and so this mimic that portion on Windows as well.
So on systemd, you're saying it's got 3 different log syncs?
Not on systemd, on Windows. So on Windows, you get, for every type of verbosity, you get a file.
Okay. Do you have event log integration in the kubelet or kubeproxy today, or is that only in the Docker daemon? Looks like I know my team added that to the Docker daemon.
It's only in the Docker daemon. When we did the services part, we left it to just the normal logs, so in the files.
Okay.
So there is no integration right now between kubelet and event viewer.
Okay. Does anybody know whether or not it makes sense to use the Windows log instead of text files, or if we should be using something like the Fluent API instead?
Well, having probably event viewer is useful for Windows sysadmins, so we should have it there as an optional feature, in my opinion. But for everything else, I think either APIs or a big flat file. But let me take a look over it this week, and
Okay.
I'll sync with you to see what's the actual behavior on Linux as well.
Okay. I mean, my initial thought here is that if people want to use FluentD, then I think that it may be easier for them to consume it from a log file rather than from the Windows event log, but that's just a guess at this point. Okay. Well, yeah, if anyone's got feedback on this, please go ahead and add things to the log so that we can eventually turn this into a plan, because I've had people ask about things like FluentD and Prometheus, but nobody's been able to describe to me what the exact use case is. And when I started looking at the Prometheus stuff in particular, there's a node exporter on Linux, but it looks like it has a mix of things from different API sources. And so I think that what we'll need to do is figure out if we need to either make a Prometheus plugin that makes Windows look like a Linux node, so that way, that single node exporter has all the data. Some of it might come from the kubelet API. Some of it might come from the Windows performance counters. I'm basically trying to figure out if we need to create some sort of shim for consistency, or if we can just use the existing exporters that are there, but just ask people to configure a different set of gathering rules for Prometheus on Windows. But it's, like I said, this isn't something that I'm an expert in. So
Can we
Talked
create?
to Robert at Ticketmaster recently, but we did quite a bit of work with Prometheus and logging. I'm not there anymore, so I can't tell you the details because I don't remember, but basically built logging and Prometheus exporter sidecars.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to work pretty well. We didn't use the node exporter, but the telegraph from Influx worked pretty well as a Prometheus endpoint.
Should we create some kind of a poll on the Slack channel? I don't know if that's possible. So maybe users can pitch in whenever they log in or look into the Slack channel.
Well, I could put this doc on the Slack channel. Really, I'm not looking for like I'd really like people to sort of describe what solution they have or what they'd like to see. And I think that a poll is not going to get enough data out of that, but
yeah, it's not necessarily a poll that you need, but you need people that have real both interest and needs around monitoring to try out the different solutions and figure out what our gaps are and how can we make it better. That's really what we're looking for. A poll could give you a yay or nay or across a couple of different solutions, but maybe we don't know what the right thing is right now. So we just want people to try it out, and people that have real apps running on Kubernetes and Windows to see how do they want to monitor them and what kind of data do they want to get out of it and who will that data serve. That's what we're looking for.
yeah. So, all right. Well, I'll ping Robert on Slack with this doc and make sure it's listed in the channel. Anybody have anything else on that? Okay. So the last thing I had on the list was around the test status. Let me see if Adelina's on here. Did you want to go over the latest conformance stuff, Adelina?
Yeah, sure, I can go quick. Yeah, so basically, there were approximately 70 new conformance tests added. So we spent the last week making them work. We are now there are only 9 of them that are failing at the moment. So yeah, that's my my update on the conformance.
All right, thanks.
Can you give perhaps more details on which ones are failing of the new ones that were added?
Yeah, so I
If you
don't know if you
remember.
guys, yeah, I don't know if you guys have access to, we have a doc where we have all the failing tests. Can somebody else link to it, because I'm on the phone and that'll be just too complicated.
Yeah, I'm adding it to the meeting notes right now, so
Okay.
it's there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I've seen the tests before. I was just wondering, is there like perhaps certain commands that are associated with some of these tests? Where's that information? Perhaps I'm not seeing it. Is that also?
No, so basically, what's in the file there are the name of the test, the image that the test used, and we marked it as fail reason is basically what we managed to to get from the logs. These are basically the last of the tests. So we didn't manage to go through them in batches, so we have to actually, because they're not part of any batch, we are going through them individually, so we didn't basically got to look at them. So I cannot tell you for sure exactly what's happening in each one.
Okay.
But all the information is there regarding fail reason and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. So if I wanted to try out one of the failing tests, like it can kind of be, I guess, estimated what the exact command would be. Like if it's pod-to-pod communication, I can kind of figure it out myself.
Oh, I get it. Well, if you actually want to run them yourself, obviously that's a little bit more complicated to see exact. Are you referring to what exactly the test is doing? So, for example, if it's running a specific command or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't mark them here for all of them. Usually when we see something like that, it's fixable. So if it's not written there, and for some of them it's not, we just didn't get to them. Basically our workflow to get the specific command or whatever the test does is just reading the test. So there's no easier way or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Okay.
Okay. All right, thanks. So that's all I had. Did anybody have other topics?
Just one question from me, Patrick.
Yeah.
Since 1.11 is around the door, when do we have time to update the documentation?
So I think doc PRs were supposed to be in last week as part of the official release, but the quick start guide that we have up on the is actually over in the website repo, so I think we can update that basically anytime. I already submitted some release notes that called out the new feature additions for 1.11. Were there other docs that you were looking for?
No, I'm thinking just about the DNS case. If we need
Okay.
to list, I mean, we don't know if it will actually get in. Please document it so we can do it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see if I can find the one because we had a list of known issues over on the Windows page, so that's probably the best place to update it. So I'll go ahead and see if I can get that updated, and I'll work with David on that as well. So he's been tracking some of the DNS stuff too. So we'll get one of those done real quick. Okay, I found it here.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to hop on over to the SIG node meeting now and see what's going on there. All right. All right. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.